Welcome to the story of Jephthah. You've noticed, haven't you, that with each successive judge, the stories have gotten gorier and bloodier. Each judge is of a lower quality than the judge that preceded him. Jephthah is no exception. I should caution you that this story has a very distressing ending. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They served the Baals and the Ashtoreths, and the gods of Aram, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the Ammonites, and the gods of the Philistines. And because the Israelites forsook the Lord and no longer served him, he became angry with them. He sold them into the hands of the Philistines and the Ammonites, who that year shattered and crushed them. For 18 years they oppressed all the Israelites on the east side of the Jordan in Gilead, the land of the Amorites. The Ammonites also crossed the Jordan to fight against Judah, Benjamin, and Ephraim. Israel was in great distress. In the previous cycles of idolatry, Israel fancied one particular pagan god or the other. Now, they have set up a whole supermarket of deities to choose from, 7 gods drawn from every nation that bordered Israel. One god they pointedly do not serve is Yahweh. In proportion to these new depths of disobedience, the Lord hands them over to not one, but to 2 oppressors, Ammon to the east and Philistia on the west. Caught between the blades of these shears, Israel becomes the sad subject of a series of verbs: shattered, crushed, oppressed. Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord, "We have sinned against you, forsaking our God and serving the Baals." The Lord replied, "When the Egyptians, the Amorites, the Ammonites, the Philistines, the Sidonians, the Amalekites, and the Maonites oppressed you, and you cried to me for help, did I not save you from their hands? But you have forsaken me and served other gods, so I will no longer save you. Go and cry out to the gods you have chosen. Let them save you when you are in trouble." The Lord's answer is so uncharacteristic of his responses so far in the book of Judges that we can only assume that Israel is merely attempting to manipulate him with a show of repentance. Yahweh recounts a list of 7 nations he saved Israel from, sarcastically emphasizing Israel's 7-fold idolatry. The point the Lord is making is that his grace towards Israel has been matched measure for measure by Israel's ingratitude. The Ammonites now force Israel to war. They camped in Gilead, and the Israelites assembled and camped at Mizpah. Then the leaders of the people of Gilead said to each other, "Whoever will take lead in attacking the Ammonites will be head over all who live here in Gilead." Here we have yet another example of bad selection of leaders. The previous judge, Abimelech, had ridden the wave of communal politics. Here, a military emergency decides who will head administration and who will be judge. Now the next judge enters. Jephthah, the Gileadite, was a mighty warrior. His father was Gilead, his mother was a prostitute. Gilead's wife also bore him sons, and when they were grown, they drove Jephthah away. "You are not going to get any inheritance in our family," they said, "because you are the son of another woman." So Jephthah fled from his brothers and settled in the land of Tov, where a gang of scoundrels gathered around him and followed him. When this next judge enters, we immediately recognize that he is a look-alike of his predecessor, the ill-fated Abimelech. On closer inspection, Jephthah is diminished even further. At least, Abimelech was born to a concubine and as such was within the outer edges of legitimacy. Indeed, he could exploit his birth by commanding the loyalty of a major city like Shechem. Jephthah, on the other hand, is the son of a prostitute and as such is explicitly despised by his family. While Abimelech could eliminate his half-brothers, Jephthah is evicted by his. Abimelech gains himself a kingdom. Jephthah lives in exile. Abimelech at least leads a band of hired soldiers, but Jephthah is little more than a gang lord. When the Lord had chosen deliverers, he had handpicked people. Remember the resourceful left-handed Ehud. And then there was Deborah, the head of the country's judiciary, the fearless ironsmith's wife, Jael, and even the reluctant farmer, Gideon. But when the people elected a leader, the choice fell on someone like Abimelech, a potential despot. And as if this was not bad enough, now there was an open call for whoever wants the position. When they found that there were no takers, the best candidate that came to their mind was a mafia don called Jephthah. The elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tov. "Come," they said, "be our commander so that we can fight the Ammonites." Jephthah said to them, Didn't you hate me and drive me from my father's house? Why do you come to me now when you're in trouble?" We suppose he lays the culpability for his exile on the heads of the leadership, which had not bothered to intervene on his behalf when he was in trouble. The elders of Gilead said to him, "Nevertheless, we are turning to you now. Come with us to fight the Ammonites, and you will be head over all of us who live in Gilead." Jephthah is tempted. "Suppose you take me back to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gives them to me. Will I really be your head?" The elders of Gilead replied, "The Lord is our witness. We will certainly do as you say." So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and commander over them. Notice how the selection committee had started with the offer of commander of the army. But Jephthah haggled and bargained till he not only got a promise of kingship, but managed to get himself crowned king even before he has fulfilled his part of the bargain, which was to deliver them from Ammon. How cunningly he maneuvered himself from outcast to overlord. Jephthah now prepares for war, and the Spirit of the Lord came on Jephthah. He crossed Gilead and Manasseh, passed through Mizpah of Gilead, and from there he advanced against the Ammonites. From previous judge stories, we anticipate that Jephthah will now rout the enemy, and indeed he does. Then Jephthah went over to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gave them into his hands. He devastated 20 towns, from Aroer to the vicinity of Minnith, as far as Abel Keramim. Thus Israel subdued Ammon. But there's something extra in this judge story. In between the spirit empowerment and the victory over the enemy, there is a speech. For the first and only time in this story, Jephthah speaks to God. On the eve of setting out into battle, Jephthah made a vow to the Lord. If you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. Now, there's nothing wrong with making a vow. Indeed, vows were common expressions of piety in the Old Testament. However, in this context, the vow seems unnecessary because God was going to empower Jephthah with his spirit. The vow even sounds unethical. Note Jephthah's tone of bargain. It recalls the bargain that he dealt with the elders of Gilead. If you make me king over you, I will come and be the commander of your army, he had said. And now he uses a similar language. If you give the Ammonites into my hands, he says to God, I will do something for you. God says nothing. The silence is ominous, especially since Jephthah has vowed to offer a burnt offering of whatever comes out of the door of my house. Now let's look at Jephthah's vow in a little bit of detail. When he talks about the door of his house, what he means is the entry point to his property, which was probably either farmland or grazing land, and what he might expect to see as he crosses over the boundary of his property might be a farm animal, such as an ox or a cow, a ram or a sheep or a lamb. This is what he might be offering as a potential burnt offering. In the Old Testament, the term burnt offering invariably refers to non-human sacrifice. Of course, the demand on Abraham is the only exception. But other than that, the Old Testament is absolutely uncompromising on its prohibition of human sacrifices. But notice that this is what Jephthah vows. Whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites, he will offer as a burnt offering. Meet me when I return in triumph from battle. Now think about it. Animals would not recognize a returning victor, but humans can. As a matter of fact, there was a tradition that women went out to celebrate their menfolk returning victorious from war. Further, in Hebrew, the word that the English translates as whatever can also be translated whoever. So what Jephthah is saying is, whatever or whoever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonite war will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. Is it possible that Jephthah is even prepared to make a human sacrifice to God? We know that this was quite a common practice among the Canaanites. And we should also remember that everything depended on Jephthah winning the Ammonite war. His rulership, his judgeship over the Israelites depended on it. And we know how badly he wanted it. He had bargained hard for this position, and it appears that Jephthah is now ensuring that position by a vow to the Lord. It would seem that Jephthah was so Canaanized, so paganized, that he deliberately bartered the life of a family member so as to assure himself the victory. So, who did he see when he returned home? When Jephthah returned to his home in Mizpah, who should come out to meet him but his daughter, dancing to the sound of timbrels? She came out celebrating her father's victory. She was an only child. Except for her, he had neither son nor daughter. And when he saw her, he tore his clothes in grief, and he cried, "Oh no, my daughter, you have brought me down, and I am devastated. I have made a vow to the Lord that I cannot break." "My father," she replied, "you have given your word to the Lord. Do to me just as you promised, now that the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the Ammonites. But grant me this one request," she said. "Give me 2 months to roam the hills and weep with my friends, because I will never marry." "You may go," he said. And then he let her go for 2 months. She and her friends went into the hills and wept because she would never marry. She would never live a complete life. After the 2 months, she returned to her father, and he did to her as he had vowed. He offered to the God of Israel a human sacrifice, and she was an unmarried virgin. From this comes the Israelite tradition that each year the young women of Israel go out for 4 days to commemorate the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite. When Jephthah makes his vow to God, he is met with silence. Given God's continued silence right through this episode, we puzzle over how to evaluate Jephthah's sacrifice of his daughter. Should we commend his determination to keep his word even at the cost of personal tragedy? Some clues in the story tell us how to read it. First, neither Jephthah nor his daughter are aware of the law that allowed monetary compensation for a vow that involved a human object. Leviticus 27, 1-8. Secondly, Jephthah's purpose tragically backfired. He had tried to secure his present, but ended up with no hope for a future continuation of his name. His only daughter was gone. As it turned out, there were no memorials made to commemorate Jephthah. Rather, the honor went to his daughter, in memory of whom Israel instituted an annual tradition of mourning. A third indicator of how to judge Jephthah comes from the description of the daughter. His daughter, an only child. Except for her, he had neither son nor daughter. This triple description sounds like an intentional echo of the only other comparable case, the Abraham story in Genesis 22. There Isaac is referred to as your son, your only son, whom you love. The reader cannot miss the contrast though. Abraham was called out of his home country, while Jephthah was cast out of his. The plot of the story is set rolling with God asking Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, but here Jephthah initiates the episode by offering to sacrifice his daughter. As much as God is vocal in the Abraham story, both at the beginning and at the end, here God is completely non-participative. The most telling difference is the purpose of the sacrifice. In Genesis 22, God tested the commitment of a human. In the Jephthah story, a human tests the commitment of God. It is no wonder that the stories end so differently. While Abraham accompanies his son Isaac to the mountain, Jephthah's daughter goes by herself without her father into the hills. Isaac's death is prevented by the intervention of God, but Jephthah's daughter dies because God has withdrawn. The Abraham story assures the future of father and son as a God-given reward for exhibiting faith. The Jephthah story signals the end of Jephthah's line. It is a self-inflicted loss accruing from lack of faith. Again, comparing the Jephthah story with the Abimelech story, we see a final parallel. Abimelech had sacrificed his half-brothers in order to rule over his kin. Jephthah goes one step further, even if unwittingly, unintentionally. He ends up sacrificing his daughter in order to keep himself in power over his people. What is your takeaway from this tragic story? Maybe you'd like to read Judges chapters 10 and 11 and think about it. Have you ever been in a situation, a really bad situation, in which you have prayed something like this? God, please get me out of this mess, and I promise you, cross my heart and promise you that I will never ever commit such a mistake again. Have you? That is the language of bargaining. That is the language Jephthah uses in this story. O Lord, if you will grant me victory over the Ammonites, then this is what I will offer you. The if language. If you do that, then I will do this. It's language that's common between us humans, between parent and child, between friend and friend. We make promises, but they are not really promises. They are deals, they are bargains. Ecclesiastes 5:2 reads like this: Do not be quick with your mouth, do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven and you are on earth. Therefore, let your words be few. We can't bargain with God or deal with God the way we deal with each other. We cannot reduce God to bring him down to the other side of a bargaining table. If there's one thing we learn from the Jephthah story, we learn that when we go before God with our plea, the best we can do is to ask in humility. Never, ever try bargaining with God. In our next episode, we will come to the last of our judge stories, the story of Samson. Now that is someone you have heard of, haven't you? He-Man Samson. Wait for it.